The first time they saw him, the aliens barely gave him a second glance. A frail, dirt-covered human huddled in the corner of a cargo bay, shackled and trembling. He was the sole survivor of a human starship ambush, now a prisoner aboard the Vorthian warship Kraxul. To them, he was a pathetic specimen, a creature of soft flesh and brittle bone, utterly defenseless against the mighty reptilian warriors of the Vorthian Empire. "Keep him alive," Commander Raxon had ordered with an amused flick of his clawed hand. "I hear humans are clever little things. Maybe it will entertain us before we sell it to the pits." The pits, of course, were the gladiatorial arenas of Vorthia, where captured species fought to amuse the Empire's elite. No human had ever survived the pits for more than a single match. That was just a fact. The prisoner, identified only as Lieutenant David Carter, made no protest. He sat quietly in his cell, watching, listening. He let them jeer at him, let them call him weak. They fed him scraps, tested his pain tolerance, and forced him to perform menial tasks, mopping floors, cleaning weapons, tending to wounds of injured warriors. All the while, Carter played his part, letting them believe he was broken. But he was watching, and he was learning. The act begins a month into his captivity. Carter was sent to assist in the training halls, where young Vorthian warriors honed their combat skills. He cleaned up after their duels, dragging away practice dummies and tending to bruises. Occasionally, one of the warriors would throw a punch at him just for amusement. He'd grunt, stumble, but never fight back. "Look at it." One of them laughed. No claws, no fangs, just soft flesh. Carter simply nodded, rubbing his sore jaw, then carried on sweeping the floor. What they didn't notice was how he watched every sparring session, memorizing their movements, their weaknesses. How his muscles, though lean, grew stronger each day. How he used his cleaning duties to subtly adjust training equipment, just enough to alter resistance levels, just enough to learn what Vorthians struggled with. Then came the first mistake. Young warrior named Valric, barely past his adolescent shedding, had been mocking Carter particularly hard that day. Frustrated with his own poor training results, Valric sneered and tossed a practice knife at the human's feet. "Pick it up," he challenged. "Show me what your kind can do before I cut off your fingers one by one." Carter hesitated, glancing at the surrounding warriors who had stopped to watch. They all expected him to flinch, to beg. Instead, he sighed, rolled his shoulders, and picked up the knife. The Vorthians laughed. Then Carter moved. In a blur, the knife spun in his grip, reversing position as he lunged. Valric barely had time to react before Carter sidestepped his predictable swing and slammed the knife's hilt into his ribs. The young warrior gasped, staggering backward. Before he could recover, Carter twisted behind him, placing the dull blade against Valric's throat in a perfect execution hold. The room fell silent. Then, instead of slashing, Carter released Valric and stepped back, tossing the knife at his feet. "You're too slow," he muttered, then picked up his broom and continued sweeping. The warriors exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time, they saw something in the human's eyes. Not fear, not submission, calculation. The mistake unfolds. Word. Spread. The guards watched Carter more closely, but he gave them no reason to act. He continued his duties, took his beatings, played the fool. But now, Vorthians began testing him, casual challenges in the halls, forcing him to react. Each time, Carter was just fast enough to surprise, but never enough to be considered a real threat. Until the night the ship was ambushed. A rival Vorthian warband attacked Kraxul, and chaos erupted. Carter, still locked in his cell, listened to the sounds of battle echoing through the halls. And then, in a twist of fate, an explosion rattled the ship, sending power flickering. And disengaging his cell's locks, Carter stepped out. The corridors were drenched in battle cries and blood. He moved like a shadow, retrieving a fallen Vorthian blade and advancing toward the armory. There he found familiar faces, warriors, who had humiliated him. They barely recognized him before he struck. No hesitation, no wasted movement. He used their own techniques against them, exploiting the weaknesses he had memorized. The helpless human was gone. In his place stood something the Vorthians had never imagined, a predator among reptiles. The lesson learned. By the time the battle ended, Kraxul was no longer under its original command. Carter stood on the bridge, wounded but victorious, surrounded by fallen warriors. The surviving Vorthians stared at him with something they had never felt toward a human before: terror. Commander Raxin, bleeding from a gash across his chest, looked up at the human in disbelief. You were never weak." Carter wiped blood from his face, staring down at the reptilian officer. "No, you just wanted to believe I was." He turned, activating the ship's comms. "This is Lieutenant David Carter of the former prisoner hold. The Kraxul is now under my command." And across the galaxy, in the slave pits of Vorthia, whispers of a legend began. A tale of a mistake the Vorthian Empire would never make again: the helpless human act.